Welcome to episode 2 of the Art of Tech podcast for teachers who can't tech good and want to learn to do other good. Podcast for teachers who can't tech good and want to learn to do other stuff good too. And I am your host, Cassandra Smith, the EdTech coordinator for Battleground Public Schools. And today, for our episode on starting the year with Google Classroom, I'm joined by the wonderful Jordan Osborne. And tell us about yourself and where you teach.
My name's Jordan Osborne. Currently, I teach at Daybreak Middle School, doing 6th grade ELA and history. I've done some other grades throughout my career at Battleground, and briefly worked with the tech department right after. That would have been the summer of 2020, when we were all stuck at home and just doing some teacher ed classes.
Yes, yeah, so you might recognize his voice from some of the EdTech trainings. We roped in a couple awesome tech leaders in the district to help us out, and Jordan happened to be one of those. So, like I mentioned, this episode is going to be on starting the year with Google Classroom, some tips and tricks for setting up your Google Classrooms for a successful year so that your students are kind of ready to go, you're ready to go, getting everything set up in order to have a strong year with your students. So we'll talk about some of those ways that you can set up your classroom at the beginning of the year so that things run smoothly for you.
Yeah, the first question I have, and my reputation kind of preceded me a bit since people knew I was helping with the EdTech stuff. The first question a lot of people asked, because some were surprised to see Google Classrooms already on their page, some didn't see what they thought they should. So how do those get set up at the beginning of the year?
That is a great question, and one that we always get at the beginning of the year is, so how do I get my Google Classrooms? How do I set those up? Where do they come from? And so you may have seen some emails from us. Last week, our first EdTech Tech Tuesday tip was on getting your Google Classrooms. We use Little Sis as our kind of behind the scenes platform, and Teacher Review is the connector between Google Classroom and our rosters. So you do have to use Teacher Review as the go-between, and you do need to accept your classes before they appear in your Google Classroom. So if you go to Google Classroom and you see a couple classes, they are most likely classes that you made over the past couple years, or you might be a student in some classes that were used for professional development. So those will still be in your Google Classroom, and you might be stressed that you're not seeing the classes that you want to see. You just need to go to Teacher Review, and the link for Teacher Review will be in the notes for this podcast episode. You'll log in with Google so you can have access through our district to that platform, and you'll see your new classes on the left, and you'll be able to accept those, and they will become active classes on the right, and that's how you'll be able to get those classes that are rostered through Skyward. And when your classes are active in Skyward, you'll also get an email from Little Sis. So if you do see an email from Little Sis, they do kind of look a little bit weird. That's an okay one to click on the link. We are, very serious about cybersecurity, and you do get tips from us about making sure not to click links in emails. But that one, the Little Sis, is a good email that you definitely can click the link.
So I don't need to call Scott directly.
No, yeah, that's not a phishing email. You can click on the link for the Little Sis emails, and that's how you can get access there. You can click the link in the Tech Tuesday email, or you can email me, and I can send you the link directly. to access those classes. So that's how you get those classes.
So once we get those, then is that kind of since they're coming from Skyward and their roster, does that kind of one size fits all, or are there different options for setting those up once Little Sis does that?
Yeah. So there are options. There is a couple reasons why we use the teacher review platform. You can merge classes and you can link classes. However, you do need to do that before you accept classes. So there is a order of operations with accepting classes. You do want to merge or link classes first before you accept. Because unfortunately, if you accept classes first, they're pushed out to Google Classroom, and then that takes away the ability to merge or link after the fact. So you'll want to make that decision first to merge or link. Merging is merging new classes. Linking is if you merge a new class with a current class, so an already active class, a class that you've created. And one of the cool things that you can do for linking is if you copy an old class, when you copy a class in Google Classroom, it copies all of the assignments and they're in draft mode. So all of your topics, all of your assignments are in draft mode. So it basically just makes an entire copy in draft mode of your whole class, the whole year, and then, but no students, no roster. And so then you just link your roster from this year into basically a full class ready to go.
It's already there.
Already there. So that's a nice feature that you can do with the linking option. You just have to do all of that first before you accept the class.
Right.
So there are those steps that you do need to consider when you are going through the teacher review. You can just accept your classes as is and use those rostered classes in Google Classroom, no problem. If you want to explore merging or linking, that's another.
It doesn't have to all be set in stone as it's sent to you.
Yep, you do have some options. But once you accept your classes, then there are some things that you should be doing in Google Classroom. Again, not having things set in stone, being able to personalize and set up your classes so that they work for you and your students. So things like changing the name and going in and setting up topics and all that stuff to like really personalize your space. So when you're considering setting up your classes and things like that, what are some things that you think of, like naming and setting things up?
The first thing I do is change the name. The first year that we had Little Sis doing this as a system, I wasn't totally aware of it, and I wasn't very good at it, so I actually didn't change the name because I wasn't sure if we were supposed to, if it was, I just kind of roll with it. And by the time I figured to do that, I asked my students, it was far enough in the air, like, hey, should I change this name? And they said, no, we're used to this one being the long, unwieldy name. So, but that's the first thing I do now, and I usually make it fairly descriptive in the sense of what the subject is typically history, because that's what I'm teaching now, but the period as well, so just history, fourth period, whatever it might be. And there's also those spaces on Google Classroom to put in what period you meet, what room you meet. And as a middle school teacher at Daybreak right now, that doesn't, that's not too much of a concern. I usually do it because it's right there, but I could definitely see if you were at a different level where you might have to move rooms between classes, how that could be useful.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I always like to do in terms of personalizing is give each classroom some sort of custom theme. And again, working with younger students, it kind of helps them differentiate. I know my science class is green. I know my ELA class is red. I know my history class has a picture of a rat or something, because I always do something, I kind of pick a theme for the year. But that always seems to help too with students finding that. And that's always what it comes down to for me, is just making it super clear for students to know which classroom to go to, which one to be in, where stuff can be found. So.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, like having, using the name and the theme to help differentiate that for students. What are some other things that you do to help set up your class with like topics and thinking about that stream page, that front page of your classroom?
Yeah, so I definitely make it clear when I visited old Google Classrooms when I first started using the platform, I was amazed that I just had a habit of making everything an assignment because that's what seemed important. And I wasn't really organizing them well and all that sort of stuff. But for me, some of the most important stuff has being able to differentiate when to use an announcement versus something else, because sometimes I just want to put a slideshow up, here's some notes, or here's a reference, or here's a survey that we want to take for ASB or something like that, versus an assignment. When it's an assignment, I tend to go by unit, and that is really helpful for when students either miss a big amount of time, or I keep my Skyward and my Google Classroom like assignment names kind of one-to-one, so that there's no question. So if a student sees I'm missing this on Skyward, they find it directly on Google Classroom. And then if it's organized in our Ancient Egypt unit or whatever it might be, they can find it even quicker. And the one feature I really love that I want to plug, because I didn't think it was as important as it is, I used to not put due dates on my assignments because things were kind of flexible, and sometimes we have a big assignment, and if we didn't get it done, we'd get another day or whatever it might be. But what I didn't realize and what that led to was that I might have a student who was missing an assignment because I graded them, I sent them back, and I never checked that post again. And that a student turns it in 2 days late, and then a week later they're thinking, I turned that in, why don't I have a grade? And I love that when you actually put a due date on an assignment in Google Classroom, and someone turns something in late, you get an email notification.
Ah, nice.
And it tells you this person turned this in late. And even if you extended the due date, having that there just to let you know, hey, go back and make sure you check the student's work. Because that was just something I didn't even think about when I was new to the platform. So that was a huge one. The other thing that I am getting better at, because I'm still learning, is Guardian notifications and summaries. And that's been something that I've been working with, and it's kind of, I've been adapting because I want to, if I'm going to, I've been working to have everything on Google Classroom, even if we're doing pencil and paper, you know, put it up there so if a student is gone, they can still see it. And just reaching out to parents and kind of educating them, for lack of a better phrase, but a lot of them don't know that those options are there even. So that's really useful. I'm still getting that taken care of. So I'm not quite an expert on that part yet, but if there's anything that you want to add about that.
And one of the things that's nice about Guardian Summaries is you just have to go into one class's settings and click the turn on button, and then it'll prompt you to turn on Guardian Summaries for all of your classes. So at the beginning of the year, you just turn on Guardian Summaries once, and it turns it on for all of your classes, and that's all you have to do. And then Guardian Summaries are turned on, and you don't have to do anything. They're set up. Google Classroom does the work in the background. The only thing that I would recommend is checking that people list, because in the past we've had the Guardian emails auto-populated, and so a lot of students already have a Guardian included, but students who are new to the district might not have a Guardian in there, so you might notice a couple students who don't have a Guardian listed, and so you can go in and just invite the Guardians for those students who don't have one included. And so that would be something to just fill in the gaps for your Guardian Summaries.
I've noticed that's been the case, and that's super helpful.
Yeah, you don't have to do the whole class anymore.
No, it takes so much off your plate.
Yeah. So another thing that I know that you have started doing is creating your own classes instead of using the Little Sis connected rosters. How has that been, and maybe talk a little bit about why you do that?
So yeah, I'll do that in kind of specific circumstances. If I know I'm going to need a Google Classroom that doesn't need to last a whole semester or even a 6-week term or whatever it might be, because I've had the way we do our enrichment stuff at Daybreak, sometimes we have kids floating around, sometimes we switch really rapidly or really quickly. So instead of using the Google Classroom that's made for me specifically at that time, I'll create one that I know that I can swap kids in and out easily. And the nice part about that is that since it's not connected to Skyward, when I swap one out, it doesn't try to
Bring them back.
bring them back in. And that's been really useful. The other thing that I've done, I'm helping more with ASB now, and so keeping one for like an after-school activity when it's something that we need to have some updates for, or something that students can easily check and go back and reference, is really useful. And what's neat about it is that depending on how you do it, it can be so easy to get kids. The main thing that not the main thing, we're talking about all the great things, but something that Little Sis is great for is that auto-population. You don't have to spend class time getting kids entered, but if you're working with a smaller group, which is what I tend to use these for, it's really, I'm finding they're really good at getting into those classrooms using the code or using just an email link. They've done it enough so they can do it pretty quickly. The other thing that I've done it with is I'm doing some team teaching now, so every now and then, we'll create one joint classroom that maybe looks different than the roster on Skyward would for whatever reason. Sometimes I'm teaching with someone who has some kids who get pulled out during my half of the time, but they're there during her half of the time. It can get a little weird. So rather than using two distinct Google Classrooms for a block period, we can kind of alter and shift as kids need to move in and out.
Yeah, you can really personalize it if you're doing the teacher-created classrooms. So another question about setting up your classroom and maybe using some of the features to plan ahead and save time. What are some of the newer features or older classics that you use to be efficient in the platform?
There's kind of two highlights that I love, and one is the one I took advantage of first was reusing stuff from old classrooms. And what is really cool about that to me is that I knew that if I have my first period and my second period, I can reuse a post between those. I knew that. That was one of the first things I learned. What I didn't realize at first was that I can go back into my archived classes and reuse posts from there. And they'll pull up the attachments, they'll pull up all that stuff, should it still exist and everything. But that's been great. That's been so useful because sometimes I'll remember, I did this assignment 3 years ago that was great for that group. It didn't work for others, so I didn't use it. But now it would fit here, and if I can usually find it because it's all archived. So that's a huge time-saving thing. That's been really cool. The other thing that I like to use is scheduling across classes, because if I know something is going to be applicable to all my classes, instead of going to each Google Classroom, which can be tedious, you can just schedule one post at a time or one post to be posted at one time for everything, and that's so useful. It's because I know a lot of people don't like the tedium of post it here, post it here, post it here, especially if you're doing the same content area throughout it. So if I know that I'm giving the same notes to every class, and I can just blanket it.
Yeah, the schedule across posts feature is really nice, and you can personalize the due dates for the different classes, which is really cool. So we've talked about ways that you can set up your Google Classroom using the topics for units and use your stream in addition to the classwork section, reusing posts and the schedule across classes. And renaming your class is going to be huge for the success of Google Classroom throughout the year for both you and your students, so that you don't have the super long Skyward name. And then getting your classes too from teacher review, if you did want to use the rostered classes, but you can also create your own classes that you can personalize that might be helpful for different situations if you have a smaller group, after school club, or any type of special situation that might come up. So there's lots of different creative ways that you can use Google Classroom, and ways that you can use those features to set up your class for a successful year. So thank you very much, Jordan, for joining us for our episode today. And be sure to tune in for our next episode on setting high expectations for your students as we continue with our theme for introducing technology in the classroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you.